The vintage Chateau Margaux 1982 dripped like blood down Eleanor Hayes's navy dress, each drop marking time in the suddenly silent ballroom. 200 of New York's elite held their breath as 18-year-old Brandon Mitchell's laughter echoed off crystal chandeliers, his parents Robert and Victoria applauding their son's calculated cruelty. "Some stains wash away with water," Eleanor whispered, her single tear catching the light as it fell onto the wine-soaked fabric. "Others require a lifetime." The Ritz-Carlton's head of security, an elderly black man named Samuel, watched from the doorway with knowing eyes. The same eyes that had seen Eleanor grow up in these halls when her father Marcus had worn that uniform. In exactly 1 hour, 3 lives would shatter, 3 hearts would break, and 1 empire worth $650 million would crumble. But first, Eleanor Hayes would teach them all what dignity looked like when worn by the daughter of a doorman. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Eleanor Hayes stood quietly in the ballroom corner, her 55 years of life etched gracefully in the laugh lines around her eyes. As CEO of Hayes Foundation, she controlled $50 billion in assets. Yet tonight she wore her mother's simple navy dress and pearl necklace, the only inheritance from a woman who died scrubbing floors when Eleanor was 7. Few in this glittering crowd would recognize the daughter of Marcus Hayes, the Ritz-Carlton's doorman for 40 years, who raised her alone in a 1-bedroom apartment 10 blocks from here. Across the room, Robert Mitchell commanded attention as only a $2 billion real estate mogul could. At 58, his silver hair and tailored tuxedo projected success, while his wife Victoria, 54, still carried herself with the poise of the fashion model she'd once been. Their son, Brandon, 18 and home from his freshman year at Princeton, held court among a cluster of young socialites, his laughter sharp as champagne bubbles. What the Mitchell family's admirers didn't know was that their empire was hemorrhaging money. Bad investments and over-leveraging had left them desperate for a $650 million bailout. Their last hope stood unrecognized in a corner, Eleanor Hayes, who tomorrow was supposed to sign the papers saving them from bankruptcy. The ballroom buzzed with purpose. This annual Christmas Eve charity gala raised funds for Children's Hospital's cardiac unit, where children from working families received life-saving surgery regardless of their ability to pay. Eleanor had anonymously donated $10 million tonight, planning to announce the new Marcus Hayes pediatric wing in honor of her father. Judge Harold Peterson, the evening's host, prepared for the auction while Sarah Williams, the hotel's manager and daughter of Marcus's old colleague, supervised the staff with quiet efficiency. Thomas Chen, Eleanor's trusted CFO, had urged her to skip tonight's event, sensing something amiss in the Mitchell deal. But Eleanor insisted on attending. This ballroom held too many memories. Her daughter Grace, 28 and exhausted from a 20-hour shift as a psychiatric resident, had promised to stop by after work. Grace specialized in trauma therapy for children of addicts, understanding brokenness in ways that made Eleanor both proud and heartbroken. The chandelier light caught Victoria Mitchell's diamonds as she whispered something to her husband. Robert's eyes swept the room with the calculating gaze of a predator. Neither noticed Eleanor Hayes watching them, remembering another Christmas Eve 30 years ago when their positions had been very different. The fraternity brothers from Princeton circled Brandon Mitchell like hyenas scenting opportunity. Tyler Brennan, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, pointed his champagne flute toward Eleanor. 20,000 says you won't humble that frumpy old lady, he slurred, his words carrying the casual cruelty of inherited privilege. Look at her. Probably somebody's secretary who saved up all year for a ticket. Brandon Mitchell felt the familiar pressure of expectations, not his father's this time, but his peers, which somehow cut deeper. At 18, he'd learned that maintaining status required constant performance. The other young men laughed, their voices cutting through Vivaldi's Four Seasons playing softly in the background. James Worthington III raised the stakes. 50,000. But you have to make it memorable, something these stuffed shirts will gossip about for months. Yes. Eleanor remained unaware of the conspiracy forming across the room. She was studying the auction items, particularly a photograph of the hospital's cardiac unit where her father had spent his final days. The memories flooded back Marcus, insisting she not pay for a private room. saying he'd rather die among his people than live among strangers. She'd honored his wish, though it had broken her heart to see him in a ward bed, surrounded by the families of janitors, bus drivers, and seamstresses. Brandon approached with calculated casualness, weaving slightly as if drunk, though his eyes remained sharp and focused. He carried a bottle of Chateau Margaux 1982 worth $3,000, borrowed from the auction table. His friends watched from their corner, phones ready to capture the moment. This would be the story that defined him at Princeton the night he put some nobody in their place. "Excuse me, ma'am," Brandon said, his voice dripping false courtesy. "I wanted to compliment your dress. It's so refreshingly vintage." The word twisted into an insult. "You must shop at such interesting places." His friends snickered audibly. Victoria Mitchell, observing from nearby, nudged Robert with approval. "Look, Brandon's finally learning to work a room," she murmured. Eleanor turned, recognizing the tone if not the boy. She'd heard it countless times in boardrooms where men assumed she was serving coffee rather than running the meeting. "Thank you," she replied simply, her voice carrying a warmth that momentarily confused Brandon. "It was my mother's. She would have loved seeing it at such a beautiful event." The genuine response disrupted Brandon's rhythm. For a second, he saw her as a person rather than a target. Then Tyler's laugh cracked across the room like a whip, and Brandon remembered the stakes. He shifted his weight, pretending to stumble. The wine bottle tilted with practiced precision. Time slowed as $3,000 of vintage Bordeaux arced through the air. The deep red liquid splashed across Eleanor's navy dress, spreading like blood across water. Drops scattered onto her mother's pearls, each bead catching the light like tiny tears. The wine pooled at her feet, staining the hem she'd carefully mended that morning. The ballroom fell silent. 200 conversations stopped mid-sentence. The quartet ceased playing. Every eye turned to the tableau Brandon Mitchell standing with the empty bottle, his expression shifting from triumph to something unreadable. Eleanor Hayes, frozen as wine dripped from her dress onto the marble floor. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry." Brandon's apology rang hollow as theatrical laughter erupted from his corner. "Though honestly, Grandma, maybe you should stick to bingo nights. This crowd's a bit out of your league." The cruelty landed with precision, each word chosen to wound. Robert Mitchell's bark of laughter shattered the silence. "Boys will be boys," he called out, striding over with his wallet already in hand. "Don't worry about it, ma'am. We'll cover the cleaning bill. Hell, I'll buy you 10 new dresses." He pulled out a roll of hundreds, peeling them off like tissues. "Here's 1,000. Should more than cover it." Victoria joined them, her laugh tinkling like broken glass. "Robert, darling, that dress probably cost less than the wine you could buy her entire wardrobe with what you're holding." She looked Eleanor up and down with practiced disdain. "Though honestly, honey, the wine might be an improvement. Add some color to all that navy." Eleanor stood perfectly still, feeling every eye in the room upon her. The wine had soaked through to her skin, cold and sticky against her chest, her mother's pearls, worn by a woman who died on her knees scrubbing these very floors, dripped with wine that cost more than her mother had earned in a month. She felt a presence beside her. Samuel, the security guard, had moved closer, his hand twitching as if to intervene. But Eleanor didn't need intervention. She needed this moment to mean something. Slowly, with the dignity her father had taught her, she accepted a napkin from a trembling waiter. She dabbed at her dress without hurry, without shame, without anger. When she looked up at Brandon, her eyes held something that made him step back, not rage, but a profound sadness, as if she were looking at a terminally ill patient who didn't yet know his diagnosis. "Some stains," she said quietly, though her voice carried throughout the silent ballroom. "Wash away with water. Others require a lifetime of scrubbing, and some, young man, become permanent markers of who we choose to be." Sarah Williams, the hotel manager, pushed through the crowd. She'd recognized Eleanor the moment she'd arrived, but had respected her desire for anonymity. Now, Seeing the wine staining the dress, seeing the Mitchells' smug faces, Sarah couldn't remain silent. She dropped to her knees beside Eleanor, using her own jacket to dab at the dress. "Mrs. Hayes," Sarah said, loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "please, let me help you. We have a suite upstairs where you can change." She looked up at the Mitchells, her voice hardening. "I'll make sure to send the cleaning bill to the proper parties." The name rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Hayes, Eleanor Hayes, the Eleanor Hayes. Judge Harold Peterson's commanding voice cut through the ballroom's stunned silence. The 70-year-old former Supreme Court justice had seen enough trials to recognize a pivotal moment when it arrived. He abandoned his position at the auction podium and walked deliberately toward the wine-stained scene, his footsteps echoing off marble floors. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of 40 years on the bench. "You have just witnessed what may be the most expensive practical joke in Christmas Eve history. Not because of the wine Chateau Margaux, though exceptional, can be replaced, but because the young Mr. Mitchell has just publicly humiliated the woman who, 30 minutes ago, anonymously pledged $50 million to save your children's lives." The color drained from Robert Mitchell's face like water from a broken dam. His hand, still holding the $1,000, began to tremble. Victoria's perfectly painted lips formed a silent "oh" as the implications crashed over her. Brandon stood frozen, the empty wine bottle suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds in his hand. "This woman," Judge Peterson continued, gesturing to Eleanor with the reverence typically reserved for visiting dignitaries, "is Eleanor Hayes, CEO of Hayes Foundation, the same foundation that has quietly funded every major children's hospital expansion on the eastern seaboard for the past decade. Tonight, she planned to announce the Marcus Hayes Pediatric Wing, named for her father, who worked as a doorman in this very hotel for 40 years. The crowd parted as Eleanor stood, wine still dripping from her dress. She touched Sarah Williams gently on the shoulder, helping her to her feet. "Thank you, dear," she said softly. Then, addressing the room with a composure that seemed impossible given the circumstances, she spoke, "Judge Peterson, while I appreciate your intervention, I hadn't intended for my donation to be public knowledge. My father taught me that charity performed for recognition feeds the giver's ego, not the receiver's need." She turned to the Mitchell family, who stood clustered together like defendants awaiting sentencing. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, Brandon, would you join me on the balcony? I believe we have matters to discuss that don't require an audience." The walk to the balcony felt like a funeral procession. The crowd parted silently, some with sympathy for Eleanor, others already calculating the social distance they'd need to put between themselves and the Mitchells. The December wind hit them immediately as they stepped outside, snowflakes beginning to fall with the delicate insistence of truth demanding to be acknowledged. Eleanor stood at the railing, looking out over Manhattan's glittering lights, the same view she'd cleaned windows to see 40 years ago when she'd worked the night shift to pay for college. The city sprawled below them, indifferent to human drama, yet somehow made beautiful by it. "Do you know what's ironic about this moment?" Eleanor began, not turning to face them. 30 years ago, almost to the day, a young man stood on this very balcony, ready to jump. He'd lost everything: his company, his home, his sense of worth. The banks had foreclosed that morning. His wife was 7 months pregnant with their first child. He saw no way forward except down. Robert Mitchell's breath caught audibly. His hand found the railing for support. Eleanor continued, her voice carrying the weight of long-held secrets. "A 25-year-old woman was cleaning these windows that night. She shouldn't have been on this floor. It wasn't her section. But something, call it fate or God or simple human instinct, brought her here. She talked to that man for 3 hours. Told him about her father, a doorman who raised his daughter alone after his wife died. How they lived on beans and rice for weeks so she could have a winter coat. How dignity isn't about what you have, but who you are when you have nothing. She turned then, facing Robert directly. That woman was me. That man was you, Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Brandon looked between his father and Eleanor, trying to reconcile this history with the parents he thought he knew. Robert's legs seemed to give way. He caught himself against the balcony door. You're the one who bought our house, Robert whispered. The anonymous buyer who let us rent it for $1 a month until I got back on my feet. Eleanor nodded. The same house where Brandon took his first steps, where you rebuilt your empire from a card table in the garage, where Victoria planted roses that still bloom every spring, though you sold it 5 years ago to buy the Hampton estate. My God, Victoria breathed. Then suddenly her face crumpled. The clinic, the free clinic on Madison. You were there when I was pregnant with Brandon. I had no insurance. Robert's new business hadn't turned profitable yet. I was scared, alone, and some woman in the waiting room held my hand through the entire ultrasound. She said, Victoria's voice broke. She said, raise him to be kind before you raise him to be successful. The world has enough successful people. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. You were so young, so frightened, and you promised me you promised you'd teach him that every person has value, that wealth is measured in what we give, not what we take. She looked at Brandon, who seemed to have aged years in minutes. I can see that promise was forgotten somewhere between the private schools and the country clubs. Brandon found his voice, though it came out strangled. You're the woman my mother mentions every Christmas. The one who gave her hope when she had none. She lights a candle for you every year, praying you're happy wherever you are. I've been quite happy, Eleanor replied, building hospitals, funding schools, creating opportunities for children whose parents clean offices and serve food. My father died last year, surrounded by hundreds of people whose lives he'd touched with simple kindness. He never earned more than $30,000 a year, but his funeral required the cathedral to open its overflow rooms. Tell me, Brandon, how many people would come to yours? The question hung in the air like ice crystals, beautiful and sharp. Brandon couldn't answer. He knew the truth: his funeral would be attended by those obligated or those expecting inheritance. No one would come because they'd loved him. But this isn't just about the past, Eleanor continued, her tone shifting to business. It's about the future, specifically the $650 million investment your father needs to save Mitchell Enterprises from bankruptcy. The contracts my lawyers finished reviewing yesterday. The signing scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. Robert's face, already pale, went gray. Eleanor, please, it's not just us. We employ 5,000 people. Families depend on those jobs. If Mitchell Enterprises falls, I'm aware, Eleanor interrupted. I've read every employee file. Maria Gonzalez, single mother of 3, works in your accounting department. She's put 2 children through college on her salary. James Patterson, 62, veteran, drives trucks for your construction division. He's 4 years from retirement. Should I continue? I know them all. Robert, the question is, This is my fault, Brandon interjected suddenly. Don't punish thousands of families because I'm an ass. I'll apologize publicly. I'll work for free at the hospital. You'll do nothing, Eleanor said firmly. Because you still don't understand. This isn't about punishment or even apology. It's about revelation. She pulled out her phone, showing them a photograph. This is my father, Marcus Hayes. Look closely. Robert. Robert peered at the screen, then staggered. In the photograph, a younger Marcus stood in his doorman uniform, and beside him, barely visible in the background, was a young Robert Mitchell, signing papers at a fold-out table in what appeared to be a hotel storage room. Your first deal, Eleanor said. The one that started everything. You signed it in this hotel's basement because you had no office. My father let you use that space, brought you coffee, told you stories about his daughter in college to calm your nerves. You gave him a $100 tip that day, the largest he'd ever received. He framed that bill, said it was proof that kindness pays dividends. Robert sank onto a snow-dusted bench, his head in his hands. Marcus. God. I remember. He had such pride in you. Said his daughter would change the world someday. I never connected, never realized, because you stopped seeing the people who served you, Eleanor said, not unkindly, but with devastating accuracy. They became invisible, the doormen, the waiters, the janitors, background furniture in your important life, and you taught your son the same blindness. Victoria sat beside her husband, mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. We lost our way. After the money came, after the success, we forgot who we were, where we came from. Eleanor studied them for a long moment, then made a decision that would change everything. Come with me, all of you. There's something you need to see. They followed her back through the ballroom, past the staring crowd, to a service elevator most guests didn't know existed. Eleanor pressed the basement button, and they descended into the bowels of the hotel where Marcus Hayes had spent 40 years of his life. The service elevator descended into the hotel's basement, a world removed from the glittering ballroom above. Fluorescent lights flickered over concrete walls lined with time clocks and employee lockers. The smell of industrial detergent mixed with coffee from the break room. This was where Marcus Hayes had started each shift for 40 years, where Eleanor had spent countless hours as a child waiting for her father to finish work. This is where I learned about hard work, Eleanor said, running her hand along a row of lockers. Locker 237 was my father's. He kept my report cards taped inside, next to a photo of my mother. She stopped at the locker, now bearing another name, another life. Every A was a victory against circumstance. Every scholarship application was a rebellion against statistics that said doormen's daughters don't become CEOs. She led them to a small break room where a coffee-stained ledger sat on a metal table. Opening it, she revealed pages of handwritten entries dating back 30 years. The employees keep this unofficially. It's a record of kindnesses, who helped whom, who covered shifts for sick colleagues, who shared lunch when someone couldn't afford it. Look, she pointed to an entry from 1994. December 24th, Marcus Hayes gave his Christmas bonus to Jenny Chen, whose son needed surgery. Robert Mitchell leaned closer, recognizing something. That's the day I tried to... He couldn't finish the sentence. That was the day he'd stood on the balcony, ready to end everything. Yes, Eleanor confirmed. My father gave away his bonus, then worked double shifts for 3 months to make rent. He never told me until years later. He said helping you helped him understand that everyone carries invisible weight. Even the wealthy can be poor in spirit. Victoria touched the ledger with trembling fingers. These people, they take care of each other. While we were upstairs drinking champagne worth their monthly salary. Don't romanticize poverty, Mrs. Mitchell, Eleanor said sharply. There's nothing noble about choosing between medicine and food, but there is something profound about maintaining dignity and compassion when the world gives you every reason to become bitter. She turned to Brandon. Your friend Tyler Brennan, who bet you $50,000 to humiliate me, his father's pharmaceutical company charges $700 for insulin that costs $3 to produce. Maria Gonzalez, who works in your accounting department, spends half her salary on her diabetic daughter's insulin. The same Maria your father just mentioned as someone whose job he wants to save. Brandon looked sick. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. You've never had to know. That's the luxury of wealth, ignorance of others' suffering. Eleanor pulled out a folder from a filing cabinet that looked older than Brandon. This is my college thesis, written on a typewriter in this break room. The Economics of Invisibility, How Service Workers Sustain American Luxury. My professor said it was too angry, too personal. He was right. But it became the foundation for Hayes Foundation's philosophy, make the invisible visible. She led them deeper into the basement, to a storage room converted into a makeshift office. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of faces, all hotel employees over the decades. My father created this. He called it the Wall of Worth. Every employee who worked here, their picture went up. No hierarchy, doormen next to managers, housekeepers beside executives. Equal space, equal value. Robert found his own face in a corner, a young, desperate man from 1994 standing next to Marcus at what appeared to be a staff Christmas party. I remember this, he whispered. Marcus invited me to the employee celebration. I was nobody, had just lost everything, but he treated me like family, introduced me to everyone as his friend from upstairs. And how did you repay that kindness? Eleanor asked. By teaching your son that people like my father are scenery, obstacles, or at best, quaint stories about humble beginnings you've transcended. Brandon was staring at another photograph of young Eleanor, perhaps 16, tutoring hotel employees' children in a corner of the break room. One of those children, he realized with a start, was Sarah Williams, the current hotel manager. The cycles of service and advancement, of one generation lifting the next, suddenly became visible to him. 25 years ago, Eleanor continued, I started working at Brennan Investments, not as an executive as mailroom staff. I sorted mail for men who couldn't remember my name after 2 years, but I watched, learned, memorized every deal that crossed my desk. One day, I found a discarded analysis report for a tech startup. The analyst had missed something crucial, a patent that would triple the company's value. I could have kept quiet, invested my savings, made a fortune. Instead, I took it to Mr. Brennan Sr. Tyler's grandfather, Victoria said softly. He was notorious for taking credit for others' work. Eleanor smiled grimly. He tried, but I'd documented everything, sent copies to myself, created an undeniable trail. He had 2 choices: promote me or face exposure. That's how I moved from mailroom to trading floor, not through connections or family money, but by making myself impossible to ignore. She showed them another ledger, this one tracking her early investments. Every bonus I earned, I split 3 ways: living expenses, my father's medical fund, and investments. I lived on rice and beans, wore the same 3 suits for 5 years, took the bus while my colleagues drove Porsches. They laughed at me, called me the janitor's daughter behind my back, sometimes to my face. How did you stand it? Brandon asked, genuinely curious now. By remembering that my father stood for 40 years in the cold, opening doors for people who looked through him. If he could maintain dignity in invisibility, I could maintain it in hostility. Eleanor pulled out a financial statement. By 2010, my personal portfolio was worth $50 million. By 2015, $500 million. By 2020, $5 billion. But wealth was never the goal, it was the tool. She led them to a computer terminal that looked out of place in the basement. On screen were hundreds of financial records. Hayes Foundation has funded 15 hospitals, 40 schools, 200 scholarship programs. We've paid for medical care for over 1 million children. But here's what the public doesn't know: 60% of our funding goes to the children of service workers, janitors, food service, retail, cleaning staff, the invisible army that keeps America running. My God, Robert breathed. The Mitchell Foundation looks like a lemonade stand compared to this. Because your foundation is about tax breaks and social capital, Eleanor said bluntly. Mine is about transformation, which brings us to the present situation. She pulled up Mitchell Enterprises' financial records. You need $650 million to avoid bankruptcy. Your collateral is leveraged beyond recovery. No bank will touch you. I'm your last hope. We know, Victoria said quietly. We've known for months. The lifestyle, the parties, the bravado, it's all performance. Trying to maintain appearances until we could secure your investment. Eleanor studied them. But here's what my due diligence revealed that surprised me. During COVID, when every other real estate company was laying off employees, you kept everyone on payroll. You sold your yacht, your plane, several properties not publicly, but quietly to meet payroll. You even paid medical expenses for employees' families affected by the virus. Robert looked up, surprised she knew. They were our people, their families. We couldn't just abandon them. Yet you could abandon your values, your humility, your connection to humanity once the crisis passed. Eleanor turned to Brandon. Your son volunteers at the hospital. Did you know that? Of course, Victoria said. It's court-ordered. His DUI last year. No, Eleanor interrupted. The court ordered 50 hours. He's completed 300. He goes twice a week. Reads to children in the cardiac unit. The same unit my donation will expand. The nurses call him Story Boy. They have no idea he's a Mitchell. Brandon's face flushed. How did you... My daughter Grace is the psychiatric resident who supervises the volunteer program. She's mentioned you, though she never connected you to the Mitchell name. She said you have unusual empathy for someone your age, especially with the children whose parents work multiple jobs to afford treatment. Eleanor paused. She also said you seem profoundly lonely, as if you're playing a role that exhausts you. The revelation hung between them. Brandon's carefully constructed image, the arrogant rich kid. The fraternity prince suddenly seemed like armor worn to protect something fragile underneath. There's more, Eleanor continued, pulling up security footage on her phone. This is from earlier tonight, before the wine incident. You were defending me, weren't you? When Tyler and the others started mocking the old lady in the cheap dress, you redirected their attention. The wine spill, it wasn't random. You made yourself the villain to prevent them from doing something worse. Brandon's shoulders sagged. They were planning to publicly embarrass you during the auction, make you bid on something, then reveal you couldn't afford it. It would have been cruel, calculated. The wine. I thought if I did something stupid but ultimately harmless, they'd be satisfied. I didn't know who you were. I couldn't watch them destroy someone for entertainment. Yet you still did it, Eleanor pointed out. You still chose to hurt someone to protect your image. Because I'm a coward, Brandon admitted, the words ripping from him. I've been a coward my whole life, afraid of disappointing my parents, afraid of losing my friends, afraid of being seen as weak. So I hurt others before they can hurt me. It's pathetic. Eleanor studied the young man, really looked at him for the first time. She saw Robert's jaw, Victoria's eyes, but something else too. A familiar exhaustion, the weight of performing a role that didn't fit. She'd seen it in the mirror 25 years ago. There's something else you all should know, she said, pulling out a final document. Marcus, my father, kept a journal. He wrote about your family often. Robert, not with resentment or envy, but with concern. He watched your rise, celebrated your successes, but also noted your transformation. This entry is from 5 years ago. Saw Mr. Mitchell today. He looked through me like I was glass. Success has made him transparent too. I can see straight through to the frightened young man on the balcony, but he can no longer see himself. Robert's composure finally shattered. He wept openly, the sound echoing off concrete walls. Victoria held him, her own tears falling onto his shoulder. Brandon stood apart, struggling to reconcile this broken father with the titan he'd grown up idolizing. Eleanor walked to a small shrine in the corner, a photo of Marcus in his doorman uniform, surrounded by candles lit by current employees. He died here, she said softly. Came to work despite feeling ill because they were short-staffed. Had a heart attack in this room. The employees, his true family, were with him. His last words were about forgiveness. He made me promise to forgive the world for being blind, to use my success to help others see. She faced them again, her wine-stained dress a testament to the evening's drama. I've built an empire on that promise. But tonight, I wonder if I failed him, because I wanted to destroy you. When that wine hit my mother's dress, I felt rage like I haven't experienced in decades. I had the power to ruin you, and I wanted to use it. Why didn't you? Brandon asked. Eleanor smiled sadly, because I heard my father's voice, clear as day. Ellie girl, hatred is heavy. Put it down before it breaks your back. He carried forgiveness like others carry grudges, lightly, easily, without strain. She moved to an old desk where Marcus had kept his personal belongings. From a drawer, she pulled out a $100 bill in a frame. Robert, do you remember this? Robert gasped. The tip from my first deal. You said he framed it. He did more than frame it. Look closer. Eleanor held it up to the light, revealing writing on the bill's margins in tiny script. He wrote a prayer on it. For you, for your family, for your future children. He prayed that success wouldn't change you, that wealth would enlarge your heart rather than shrink it. Every night for 30 years, he touched this bill and repeated that prayer. The weight of Marcus's faith, maintained despite evidence of its failure, crushed the last of the Mitchells' defenses. They stood exposed not as wealthy elite, but as people who'd lost themselves in the climbing. Eleanor led them back to the ballroom through the service elevator, their emergence from the basement creating a stir among the guests who'd been speculating wildly during their absence. The orchestra had stopped playing, and clusters of people whispered behind raised champagne glasses. Judge Peterson stood at the microphone, clearly prepared to manage whatever came next. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor said, taking the microphone with the authority of someone who'd addressed Congress, the UN, and boardrooms full of hostile takeovers. "I need to share something with you about the nature of charity, dignity, and the wine currently staining my mother's dress." The crowd pressed closer. Several people had their phones out, recording what they sensed would be a historic moment. The Mitchells stood to the side, Robert still visibly shaken, Victoria clutching her husband's arm, Brandon isolated in his shame. 40 years ago, a doorman named Marcus Hayes worked in this hotel. He opened doors in the freezing cold, carried bags until his back ached, smiled at people who never saw him. He was my father. Eleanor let that sink in. Every person in this room has probably passed through a door he held, never knowing that the man holding it had a daughter who would one day control $50 billion in assets. She walked to the center of the room, the wine stains on her dress catching the light like badges of honor. Tonight, young Brandon Mitchell poured wine on me. $3,000 of Chateau Margaux now decorates a dress my mother wore while scrubbing these very floors. The symbolism is almost too perfect, the excess of wealth literally staining the dignity of labor. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Tyler Brennan and his fraternity brothers tried to edge toward the exits, but security guards, positioned by Sarah Williams, blocked their retreat. "But here's what you don't know," Eleanor continued. 30 years ago, I saved Robert Mitchell's life. He was standing on that balcony. She pointed to the glass doors, ready to jump because he'd lost everything. I talked him down, bought his foreclosed house, rented it back to him for $1 a month until he recovered. I did this not because I'm exceptional, but because my father taught me that we're all one tragedy away from that balcony. Gasps echoed through the room. Robert Mitchell's business rivals looked at him with new eyes, not the invincible titan they'd envied, but a man who'd touched bottom and clawed back. The Mitchell family needs $650 million to save their company from bankruptcy, Eleanor announced, causing another wave of shock. 5,000 families depend on those jobs. Maria Gonzalez, a single mother in accounting, needs that job to buy insulin for her diabetic daughter. James Patterson, a veteran truck driver, is 4 years from retirement. Should they suffer because Brandon Mitchell is young and foolish? Should entire families be destroyed because wine was spilled on a dress? She walked to where the Mitchells stood. "Robert, Victoria, Brandon, please join me here." They approached like defendants approaching a judge, each step heavy with dread. Under the chandelier's unforgiving light, they looked smaller, more human than anyone had ever seen them. "I want everyone to understand something," Eleanor said. "The Mitchell family kept every employee during COVID. They sold personal assets quietly, without fanfare to maintain payroll. They paid medical bills for workers' families. This isn't the behavior of heartless capitalists, but of people who remember, somewhere deep down, what it means to be human. But they forgot something crucial," she continued, her voice hardening. "They forgot to pass those values to their son. They forgot that privilege without purpose is poison. They forgot that every person in this room tonight is 3 generations or less from someone who served, cleaned, or built for others." Eleanor turned to Brandon. "Tell them what you told me in the basement." Brandon's voice cracked. I volunteer at Children's Hospital. Not because of my DUI, that requirement ended months ago. I go because reading to sick kids is the only time I feel like I'm worth something. The only time I'm not performing, not pretending, not drowning in expectations I never asked for. And tell them about Tyler's plan, Eleanor pressed. Brandon looked at Tyler Brennan, who was trying to become invisible against a marble pillar. They wanted to humiliate someone during the auction, make them bid on something they couldn't afford, then expose them. It would have been filmed, posted online, turned into entertainment. I couldn't let that happen, so I spilled the wine. I made myself the villain to prevent something worse. But you still chose cruelty, Eleanor said. A smaller cruelty, perhaps, but cruelty nonetheless. And your parents laughed. They threw money at the problem like they could purchase absolution, she addressed the room. This is what wealth without wisdom looks like. This is what success without soul becomes. Judge Peterson stepped forward. Eleanor, if I may, the auction was supposed to fund the new pediatric wing. Your donation will proceed, Eleanor said, but with conditions. She pulled out her phone, projecting documents onto the ballroom's large screen. Hayes Foundation will provide the full $50 million for the Marcus Hayes Pediatric Wing, but I'm withdrawing the $650 million investment from Mitchell Enterprises. The sound Robert made was barely human, a wounded animal recognizing the killing blow. Victoria swayed on her feet. Brandon stood frozen, understanding he'd just destroyed his family with a bottle of wine. However, Eleanor continued, and that single word stopped every heart in the room. I'm not finished. She clicked to another document. Hayes Foundation is creating the Marcus Hayes Recovery Fund, $650 million designated for companies that prioritize employees over profits. Mitchell Enterprises can access this fund, but only after meeting specific conditions. She outlined them with the precision of a surgeon. First, Brandon Mitchell will work in the Hayes Foundation mailroom for 1 year. Minimum wage, no special treatment. He'll learn what his parents learned and forgot, that work has dignity regardless of its nature. Second, 30% of Mitchell Enterprises will be transferred to employee ownership. The people who build the wealth will share in it. Third, the Mitchell family will liquidate personal assets above $10 million, with proceeds going to a fund for employees' medical expenses. You're destroying us, Victoria whispered. No, Eleanor corrected. I'm rebuilding you. The same way my father rebuilt me every time the world tried to convince me I was worthless because I was poor. The same way I rebuilt Robert 30 years ago when he thought death was better than failure. She turned to address the room again. Every person here has a choice. You can continue this charade, this performance of worth based on wealth, or you can remember who you really are. Someone's child, someone's parent, someone who, stripped of portfolios and pedigrees, is exactly as valuable as the person who cleans your office tonight. Sarah Williams stepped forward, emboldened. I have something to add, she said, her voice carrying surprising strength. My mother worked alongside Marcus Hayes for 20 years. She died last year, not in a private room, but in the same ward where poor people always die, surrounded by other poor people who understood that dignity isn't about thread count or square footage. She looked directly at the Mitchells. Mr. Mitchell, you walked past my mother every day for 15 years. She knew your coffee order, your mood from your footsteps, your marriage troubles from how you held your shoulders. She prayed for you specifically, by name every night. You never knew her name. It was Dorothy Williams. She would have forgiven you for that. But I wonder if you can forgive yourself. Robert's response came out strangled. Dorothy, I remember. She always smiled. Even when I was horrible, stressed, cruel, she smiled like she knew something I didn't. She did, Sarah said. She knew that happiness doesn't come from climbing ladders, but from holding them steady for others. Eleanor took control again. Brandon, I want you to understand something. Your $50,000 friends Tyler, James, the others, they're not laughing with you. They're laughing at the idea that anyone matters less than them. Is that really who you want to be? Brandon looked at his parents, their empire crumbling, then at Eleanor, wine still staining her dress but standing like a queen. "No," he said quietly. Then louder. "No, I don't want to be that person anymore." "Then prove it," Eleanor challenged. "Right now, in front of everyone." Brandon walked to where Tyler Brennan stood. "The bet's off," he said loudly, "and our friendship is over. You're everything wrong with our generation, cruel for sport, empty despite having everything, proud of ignorance." He pulled out his phone, transferring something. "There's your 50,000. Consider it payment to stay away from me." Tyler's face contorted with rage. "You're destroying yourself for some nobody, for some bleeding heart guilt trip." "No," Brandon said. "I'm destroying who you wanted me to be. There's a difference." Eleanor watched this unfold with the same expression her father had worn when she'd graduated from college, pride mixed with concern for the journey ahead. She clicked to another screen, showing a photograph that made the entire room gasp. It was from earlier that evening, before the wine incident. In it, Brandon sat in a corner with a small girl, apparently lost, helping her look for her parents. His face showed genuine kindness, patience, nothing of the arrogance he'd displayed later. The child was clearly from the service staff's family, her dress handmade, her shoes worn. "This," Eleanor said, "is who Brandon Mitchell is when he thinks no one is watching. This is who he could be all the time if we all of us stopped demanding he perform wealth instead of humanity." Judge Peterson cleared his throat. "If I may bring us back to the matter at hand, the auction, the pediatric wing, the reason we're supposedly here tonight." Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile she'd shown all evening. "You're right, Judge Peterson. We're here for the children. Specifically, children whose parents work impossible hours for insufficient wages, whose medical needs bankrupt families, whose futures are determined by zip codes." She pulled out a checkbook, writing as she spoke. "50 million for the Marcus Hayes Pediatric Wing, but I have one condition for the hospital board." The board members present leaned forward anxiously. "The wing will provide free care to any family making less than 60,000 a year. No questions, no payment plans, no debt. If a doorman's child needs heart surgery, they get the same surgeon as a CEO's child. Same room, same care, same chance at life. That's financially impossible." One board member started. "No," Eleanor interrupted. "It's financially inconvenient. There's a difference. Hayes Foundation will cover the shortfalls for the first 5 years. After that, I expect the $100 million salaries in this room to figure it out." She walked back to the wine stain on the floor, now being cleaned by hotel staff. She stopped them with a gentle hand. "Leave it," she said. "Let it remain tonight. Let everyone who passes see that something happened here, something spilled, something stained, something changed." The cleaning woman, a Latina in her 50s, looked up with tears in her eyes. "Senora Hayes." Eleanor knelt beside her. "Yes, my husband. He knew your father. Marcus helped him get this job 15 years ago. We light candles for him every Sunday." Eleanor embraced the woman, there on the floor, in front of New York's elite. The image of a billionaire in a stained dress embracing a cleaning woman while kneeling in spilled wine would appear on front pages tomorrow. But tonight, it was simply two women recognizing each other's humanity. When Eleanor stood, she addressed the room one final time. "You have a choice. Mitchell Enterprises has a choice. This city has a choice. We can continue pretending that some lives matter more than others, or we can build something better on the foundation of shared dignity. My father believed in the second option. He died believing it. Tonight, I'm asking you to live it." She turned to Brandon. "Your year starts January 2nd, 8 a.m. sharp. Mailroom, minimum wage, no cell phone during work hours. You'll sort mail for people who won't remember your name. You'll eat lunch alone while others discuss their real jobs, their real lives. You'll learn what invisibility feels like. And maybe, Just maybe. You'll learn to see. Brandon nodded, something shifting in his posture, the exhaustion of performance giving way to something else. Relief, perhaps, or recognition. One more thing, Eleanor said, pulling out a small box. Inside was the $100 bill her father had framed, the one with Robert's tip and Marcus's prayer. Robert, this belongs to you. My father's prayer for your family. He never gave up on it, even when evidence suggested he should. Robert took the frame with shaking hands, reading the tiny script through tears. Dear God, he read aloud, his voice breaking. Watch over this young man and his future family. Let success enlarge their hearts. Let wealth deepen their compassion. Let them remember that every dollar passes through hands that need hope more than paper. Amen. The ballroom stood silent. 300 of New York's most powerful people confronting the poverty of their own spirits. The wine stain on the floor seemed to grow, spreading metaphorically across the marble, seeping into cracks, marking territory that could never quite be cleaned. The ballroom had emptied by 11:30, leaving only the Mitchells, Eleanor, and Sarah Williams among overturned champagne flutes and wilting centerpieces. The wine stain on the marble floor had darkened to the color of old blood, and Brandon couldn't stop staring at it, this Rorschach test of his family's destruction. I need to show you something, Eleanor said, producing a manila envelope from her bag. These are letters from your employees. Robert, they don't know I have them. They were sent to my foundation over the past year, nominating you for our Humanitarian Employer Award. Robert looked confused. But we've never been nominated. Because I blocked it, Eleanor admitted. I couldn't reconcile the man who saved employees during COVID with the man who laughed while his son humiliated a stranger. But read them. Read what the people you've never really seen think of you. With trembling hands, Robert opened the first letter. Mr. Mitchell visited my daughter in the hospital every day during her chemotherapy. He read aloud. He never told anyone. He'd just sit there, reading her stories while I slept in the chair. When I tried to thank him, he said it helped him remember what mattered. Signed, Maria Gonzalez. Victoria took the next letter. During my husband's deployment, Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell secretly paid our mortgage for 6 months. The bank told me it was an anonymous gift, but I recognized Mr. Mitchell's handwriting on the check memo he'd written for an American hero's family. They never asked for thanks, never used it for publicity. Signed, Jennifer Patterson. Letter after letter revealed a pattern of hidden kindness, of good deeds done in shadows while public cruelty played out in spotlights. The contradiction broke something fundamental in Brandon's understanding of his parents. You're two different people, Brandon said, his voice hollow. You're kind in private and cruel in public. Why? Robert's answer came slowly, painfully. Because somewhere along the way, I started believing that public kindness was weakness, that maintaining power required performing hardness. I became what I thought success looked like, and lost what success actually was. Eleanor walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Your employees don't know that tomorrow, without my investment, Mitchell Enterprises files for bankruptcy. They don't know their jobs are gone, their health care ends, their retirements evaporate. They'll find out Monday morning via email the corporate way of destroying lives efficiently. Please, Victoria begged. There has to be another way. We'll do anything. I've given you another way, Eleanor replied. Accept my terms. Transform your company into shared ownership. Let Brandon learn humility through honest work. Liquidate your excess wealth. Become who your employees already think you are in private, but do it publicly, permanently. You're asking us to destroy ourselves, Robert said. No, I'm asking you to destroy the performance of yourselves. There's a difference. Eleanor pulled out her phone, showing them a video. This is from last year's employee Christmas party, the one you thought no one was recording. On screen, Robert stood in the employee cafeteria, not the executive dining room serving food to maintenance staff. Victoria sat at a table with the cleaning crew, learning Spanish words for her grandson. Brandon, clearly uncomfortable but trying, played guitar for the children of factory workers. They looked awkward but genuine, like people remembering how to be human. "This," Eleanor said, "is who you could be all the time. But it requires courage you've convinced yourselves you can't afford." Brandon suddenly stood, walking to the wine stain. He knelt beside it, touching the darkened marble. "When I was 7, he said quietly, I spilled grape juice on our white carpet. The housekeeper, Rosa, spent hours cleaning it. I watched her work, saw her panic about losing her job over my mistake. When my parents came home, I lied, said Rosa had spilled it. She was fired that day." He looked up at his parents. She had 3 kids. I knew that, and I still let her take the blame. That was the first time I chose cruelty over consequence. It got easier after that. "Brandon," Victoria started. "No, Mom, let me finish. Every cruelty after that first one came easier. Every person I hurt mattered less. By high school, I couldn't feel anything unless I was causing pain or receiving praise. Do you understand what you raised a son who feels alive only when he's destroying something?" Eleanor knelt beside him. "Rosa Rodriguez. She works for my foundation now. Her children all graduated college, 2 doctors and a teacher. She never knew why she was fired, but she used it as motivation to ensure her children would never be that vulnerable." Brandon's sob echoed off the marble. "She succeeded despite me." "Not despite," Eleanor corrected. "Because of your cruelty became her catalyst. But that doesn't absolve you, it just means redemption requires more than regret." Sarah Williams, who'd been silent, finally spoke. "There's something else. Mr. Mitchell, the night you almost jumped, my mother was working. She saw Ms. Hayes talk you down. She never told anyone, but she wrote about it in her diary." Sarah pulled out a worn notebook. "Saw something beautiful tonight. The janitor's daughter saved the millionaire's son. God works in circles, bringing us back to where we started but changed." She continued reading. "Mr. Mitchell doesn't remember, but years before his success, he gave my Dorothy $5 for coffee on a cold night. She used it to buy medicine for Sarah's fever instead. That medicine saved her life. The circles of kindness are larger than we can see." The weight of interconnection, of lives touching across years and social strata, filled the empty ballroom. Every kindness and cruelty rippled outward, creating waves that crashed back eventually, inevitably. "But some circles need to be broken," Eleanor said, standing. "The cycle of performed cruelty, of public hardness, of valuing wealth over worth, it ends tonight, with your family, Robert, with your son's generation, with this choice." A new voice interrupted them. "Mom!" Grace Hayes entered, still in her hospital scrubs, looking exhausted but alert. She surveyed the scene, her mother's stained dress, the Mitchells' devastation, the empty ballroom, and understood immediately. "You're Brandon Mitchell," she said, not asking. "Story boy from the cardiac unit, the one who reads to the children whose parents work night shifts." Brandon nodded, unable to speak. "Do you know what those children call you, the sad prince? They think you're under a curse, forced to pretend meanness when you're actually kind. Children see truth adults miss." Grace turned to her mother. "He's the one who's been leaving anonymous donations in the family support box. $1,000 bills, like some kind of guilty fairy tale. The families think it's a miracle. They don't know it's a Mitchell trying to buy absolution." "It's not about absolution," Brandon protested. "It's about, I don't know, feeling real. When I help anonymously, I feel real." Eleanor studied him with new interest. "Then why perform cruelty publicly?" "Because," Brandon said, the truth tearing from him. "Public kindness requires courage I don't have. Private kindness requires only money. I'm rich in money, bankrupt in courage." Robert suddenly laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "He learned that from me. I taught him that. Hide your heart. Show your strength. Never let them see you care, because caring is leverage they can use against you. Is that what Marcus used against you? Eleanor asked. When he showed you kindness, did you feel leveraged? When he prayed for your family for 30 years, was he manipulating you? Robert's laughter turned to weeping. No, he was loving me. A doorman loved a millionaire who couldn't love himself, and I taught my son that love was weakness. I destroyed my boy trying to protect him from a vulnerability that was actually strength. Victoria stood, walking to the portrait of Marcus that hung near the service entrance, a small memorial the staff had created. He looks kind, she said softly. Even in a photograph, he looks kind, like someone who knew secrets about happiness that money can't buy. He did, Eleanor said. He knew that happiness isn't about having more but needing less. He knew that dignity isn't granted by others but generated from within. He knew that every person we pass is fighting battles we can't see, carrying weights we can't imagine. She pulled out one final document. This is Marcus's will. He left everything to me. Of course he had so little, but there's a codicil, a instruction, really. He wanted me to read it to Robert Mitchell if I ever had the chance. Robert stood straighter, preparing himself. Eleanor read, Robert, you don't remember me, but I remember you. The scared young man who built an empire from fear. I watched you succeed and prayed you'd fail, not financially, but spiritually. Fail at hardness. Fail at cruelty. Fail at the performance of power. Because underneath all that success, I saw the same thing I see in my mirror, a human being terrified of being human. I forgive you for forgetting me. I hope you'll forgive yourself for forgetting yourself. The man who almost jumped was more real than the man who survived. Find him again. The silence that followed was complete, as if the building itself held its breath. Then, from somewhere in the distance, church bells began ringing midnight, Christmas Day, the traditional moment of redemption and rebirth. But for the people in that ballroom, redemption felt impossibly far away. They stood among the ruins of an evening, a family, an empire, wondering if some stains were indeed permanent, if some falls were indeed fatal, if some circles could never be squared. Eleanor picked up her coat, preparing to leave. You have 24 hours to accept my terms. All of them. Non-negotiable. Transform or collapse. Those are your options. My father believed in resurrection, but resurrection requires death first. The question is, are you brave enough to die to who you've been? She walked toward the exit, her wine-stained dress trailing behind her like a war banner. At the door, she turned back one final time. Brandon, do you know why the children call you the sad prince? Because they recognize someone under a curse? But in their stories, curses can be broken. It just requires something most adults have forgotten how to do: believe in transformation more than transaction. As she left, the Mitchells stood alone in the empty ballroom. 3 people who'd started the evening as titans and would end it as something else entirely. The wine stain on the floor had finally dried, leaving a mark that would require professional cleaning or perhaps replacement of the marble itself. But some stains, they were learning, weren't meant to be removed. They were meant to be remembered. Testimonies to the moment when everything changed, when the wine of consciousness was spilled and couldn't be put back in the bottle. Brandon looked at his parents, really looked at them, and saw not the successful real estate moguls, but 2 frightened people who'd gotten lost climbing a ladder that led nowhere. We're going to lose everything, aren't we? He asked. The revelation came from Sarah Williams's phone at 12:15 a.m. as the Mitchells sat in devastation. Mr. Mitchell, Ms. Hayes asked me to show you this after she left. It's security footage from earlier tonight, the complete version. The video played on the ballroom's large screen. There was Brandon at 7:30 p.m., before the wine incident, standing with Tyler Brennan and James Worthington III near the auction table. Their voices, captured clearly by the hotel's advanced audio system, revealed everything. Look at that pathetic old woman, Tyler sneered, pointing at Eleanor. Probably someone's secretary who saved all year for a ticket. Let's have some fun. James, you distract her during the auction. I'll bid on something worthless using her paddle number when she's not looking. When the bill comes, hundreds of thousands, we'll watch her have a breakdown. James laughed. Better yet, let's spill something on her first. Make her feel even more out of place. Then during her humiliation, we'll reveal she's also bankrupt from the auction. Brandon's face on the video showed genuine distress. That's too much. You could destroy someone's life. That's the point, Tyler replied. These people need to know their place. My grandfather always says the poor exist to remind us why we work so hard to stay rich. The video continued. Brandon tried redirecting their attention multiple times, suggesting other entertainment, other targets. But Tyler was fixated on Eleanor. Something about her quiet dignity offending him fundamentally. Fine, Brandon finally said, and the calculation in his eyes was visible. But let me do it. Something splashy but ultimately harmless. Trust me, it'll be better. He grabbed the wine bottle and walked away before they could plan anything worse. The video showed him pausing, taking a breath, steeling himself for what he was about to do. He whispered something the enhanced audio picked up. I'm sorry, whoever you are. This is the least bad option. Sarah stopped the video, then started another file. This is from 3 hours before the gala. The new footage showed Brandon in the hotel service corridor, talking to maintenance staff. He handed an envelope to Rosa Rodriguez, the same woman he'd gotten fired when he was 7, though she didn't recognize the grown man he'd become. For your grandson's surgery, Brandon said on the video. Anonymous donation to the hospital fund. Please don't ask questions. Rosa had tears in her eyes. Senor, this is $50,000. Why? Because someone needs to break the circle, Brandon replied. Someone needs to pay for old cruelties. Sarah paused the video again. There's more. Dozens of incidents over the past 2 years. Brandon Mitchell has given away nearly $3 million of his trust fund to families of people his family's company laid off, fired, or underpaid. He's been systematically trying to repair damage, but always anonymously, always in shadow. Victoria gasped. The trust fund statements. You said you were investing it. I was, Brandon said quietly. Investing in balancing the scales. Every person I've hurt, every family we've destroyed through business decisions, I've tried to make whole. It's not enough, it'll never be enough, but it's something. Sarah pulled up financial records on her tablet. Ms. Hayes had me investigate further. The Mitchell Corporation's debt isn't from bad investments or over-leveraging. It's from a systematic pattern of secret generosity. Robert, you've been hiding massive charitable giving in the company books. Victoria, you've been selling personal jewelry and art to fund employee medical emergencies. You're not broke from greed. You're broke from guilt-driven giving that you couldn't admit to publicly. Robert's head snapped up. How did you? Eleanor Hayes sees everything, Sarah said simply. She had Thomas Chen's team analyze every transaction. You created shell companies to hide charitable donations. You funded competitors to hire employees you had to lay off. You've been destroying your empire to save your soul. But you couldn't admit it because admitting it would mean acknowledging you had a soul that needed saving. Grace Hayes, who'd been silent, pulled up something on her phone. Mom knew all of this before tonight. She's been testing you, watching whether you'd choose public kindness over private, whether you'd admit your humanity or continue the performance. She showed them an email thread between Eleanor and Thomas Chen dated 3 weeks ago. Eleanor had written, "The Mitchells are financially broken, but spiritually breaking towards something better. Tonight will determine which way they fall." This was all a test, Robert asked, incredulous. No, Grace said. It was an opportunity. Mom doesn't test people, she reveals them. To others, but more importantly, to themselves. The wine incident wasn't random. She knew Brandon would do something because she knew Tyler would force him to. She wanted to see what choice Brandon would make when cruelty was demanded. And I chose cruelty, Brandon said flatly. You chose the lesser cruelty, Grace corrected. Which is still cruelty, but it shows conscience. A compromised conscience, but conscience nonetheless. Sarah's phone buzzed with a new message. She read it, then looked up with shock. Ms. Hayes wants you to know something else. The $650 million deal, it was never real. The Mitchells stared at her in confusion. Mitchell Enterprises doesn't need $650 million, Sarah explained, reading from Eleanor's message. According to the real audit, you need exactly $100 million to stabilize. The rest was a fiction your CFO created to inflate the company's importance, to make the rescue seem more dramatic. Ms. Hayes knew this from the beginning. But our CFO said, Robert began. Your CFO, Martin Walsh, has been embezzling for 5 years. Sarah continued. Small amounts, carefully hidden, but he needed a massive crisis to cover his tracks. He created fake debts, non-existent obligations, phantom crises. Ms. Hayes discovered this weeks ago. She's already had him arrested. He's currently in federal custody. The revelations came so fast that Brandon felt dizzy. So we're not actually facing bankruptcy. You're facing a choice, Sarah said. Ms. Hayes can expose Martin's embezzlement, which would save your company but destroy its reputation when people learn you didn't even know you were being robbed. Or she can let you accept her original terms, transform the company, share ownership with employees, have Brandon work in the mailroom, and she'll quietly handle Martin while investing the $100 million you actually need. Why? Victoria asked. Why this elaborate deception? Grace answered. Because my mother learned something from Marcus that people only change when they believe the stakes are ultimate. You needed to think you were losing everything to discover what everything actually meant. Was it money status, or was it the chance to become who you're supposed to be? She pulled up one more video, this one from a year ago. It showed Marcus Hayes, obviously ill but still working, talking to someone off camera, Eleanor. They realized, from her voice. Ellie girl, Marcus said, his voice weak but clear. The Mitchells are going to come to you eventually. They're drowning in money but starving for meaning. When they do, remember, punishment teaches nothing but resentment. Only mercy mixed with truth creates transformation. Make them earn redemption. But make sure they know redemption is possible. What if they refuse? Eleanor's voice asked. What if they choose the performance over the truth? Marcus smiled, the expression lighting his tired face. Then you'll know they're not ready. But Robert Mitchell stood on a balcony once, ready to die rather than live falsely. That man is still in there, waiting, and his son Brandon, he's got the same desperation, just better hidden. They're not bad people, Ellie. They're good people who've forgotten what goodness looks like. The video ended. The ballroom felt smaller, more intimate, as if the walls had drawn in to contain this moment of truth. Your father talked about us, Robert asked, even after we forgot him. Every week, Grace said. He kept a journal about people he'd served who'd lost their way. He called it the Book of Maybe. Maybe they'd remember. Maybe they'd return. Maybe they'd redeem. Your family had 10 pages. She handed Robert a photocopied section, key. His hands shook as he read Marcus's observations. January 15th. Robert looked through me again today, but his eyes were sad. He's forgotten how to see, but he remembers that he used to. March 3rd. Saw Brandon volunteer at the hospital. He doesn't know I see him. He reads to children like someone starving for innocence. October 22nd. Victoria Mitchell brought flowers to Dorothy Williams's funeral. She stood in the back, thinking no one noticed. The wealthy grieve their blindness in private. He saw everything, Victoria whispered, even when we couldn't see ourselves. Sarah's phone rang, Eleanor calling. She put it on speaker. By now you know the truth. Eleanor's voice filled the room. The embezzlement, the real debt, the extent of your secret generosities. You know that I know who you really are beneath the performance. So here's my real offer, not a test, not a manipulation, but an opportunity. She paused, letting them prepare. Hayes Foundation will acquire Mitchell Enterprises entirely. You'll receive nothing, no payout, no golden parachute, no face-saving exit. In exchange, every employee keeps their job with a 20% raise, full health care for life, pension protection, and the company becomes a model for conscious capitalism, profit shared with those who create it. We'd have nothing, Robert said. You'd have jobs, Eleanor corrected. Robert, you'd run the construction division, the actual building, not the boardroom. Get your hands dirty again. Remember what it feels like to create rather than calculate. Victoria, you'd manage community relations, real community, not galas. The families who live in our buildings, who need advocates. And Brandon starts in the mailroom, but with a future based on merit, not name. Why would we accept this? Robert asked. Because the alternative is that I walk away entirely. Martin Walsh's crimes become public. Your company crashes not from noble debt, but from negligent leadership. 5,000 people lose everything. And you spend the rest of your lives knowing you had the chance to transform destruction into construction and refused. The silence stretched, taut as a held breath. But there's one more thing, Eleanor continued. If you accept, we hold a press conference tomorrow, Christmas Day. You publicly admit everything, the wine incident, the secret charities, the performance of cruelty, the fear of kindness. You tell New York's elite that wealth without humanity is poverty. You challenge them to join you in transformation. That's social suicide, Victoria protested. That's the point, Eleanor said. Social death and spiritual rebirth. The question is, do you have Marcus's courage? Can you jump off the balcony of who you've been, trusting that something will catch you? Brandon stood suddenly. Yes. His parents looked at him in shock. Yes, he repeated, stronger. I accept. I'll do it all mailroom, public confession, social suicide, because the alternative is continuing this performance until it kills me. And it is killing me. Every day. I die a little more, becoming someone I despise but can't stop being. If humiliation is the price of transformation, I'll pay it. Robert looked at his son, really looked at him and saw himself 30 years ago, desperate for permission to be human again. If Brandon's brave enough, how can I be less? He took Victoria's hand. We accept, Eleanor, all of it. Victoria squeezed her husband's hand. The trust fund, the jewelry, the houses, I'm tired of them anyway. They're chains disguised as treasures. Yes, we accept. Eleanor's voice warmed audibly. Then tomorrow, Christmas morning, everything changes. Sarah will send you the contracts. Sign them tonight. And Brandon. Yes. The children you read to are having their Christmas celebration tomorrow at 2. They specifically asked if the sad prince would come. Perhaps you could arrive as yourself this time, not performing kindness or cruelty, just being present. The line went dead. The Mitchells stood in the empty ballroom. Everything decided, but nothing yet done. We're really going to do this, Robert said, not asking. We already have, Brandon replied. We did it the moment we stopped pretending we were okay with who we'd become. Grace Hayes began gathering her things. My mother will expect you at the hotel at 9 a.m. for the press conference. Wear simple clothes, no designers, no statements. Just be human beings admitting their humanity. As she left, she turned back. You know what Marcus wrote on his last page about your family? They're almost ready to come home. Not to a place, but to themselves. When they do, welcome them like prodigals with joy, not judgment. The Mitchells stood alone again, but somehow less lonely. The wine stain on the floor had been partially cleaned, leaving a faint outline like a watermark on paper visible only if you knew where to look, a reminder of the night everything spilled over. Christmas morning arrived with a gentle snowfall that turned Manhattan into a temporary wonderland. Eleanor Hayes stood at her father's grave in Woodlawn Cemetery at 7 a.m., the wine-stained dress draped over her arm like a battle flag from last night's war. The headstone was simple. Marcus Hayes, 1952-2023. He held doors and hearts open. She knelt in the snow, not caring that her coat would be soaked. Papa, it's done. The circle you started is closing. The Mitchells are ready to remember who they are. She laid the dress across the grave, the wine stains dark against the white snow. Mama's dress served its purpose. It caught their shame and held it long enough for them to see it. The cemetery was empty except for an elderly groundskeeper who approached with quiet reverence. "Ms. Hayes, I'm Samuel. I was at the hotel last night, working security. I knew your father for 30 years. Eleanor stood, recognizing him now in daylight. "You're the one who moved closer when Brandon spilled the wine." "I wanted to intervene," Samuel admitted. "But then I saw your face, the same expression Marcus had when people disappointed him. Not anger, just profound sadness for what they were choosing to be. He used to say, 'Samuel, the wealthy aren't evil. They're just scared. Scared that without money, they're nothing. Our job is to show them they're something.' He never told me he had such philosophical discussions with coworkers," Eleanor said, smiling through tears. Samuel laughed softly. "Your father was our unofficial chaplain. Every morning at 5 a.m., before the first shift, he'd hold court in the break room, teaching English to immigrants, helping people with citizenship papers, mediating disputes. He turned a basement into a university of human dignity." He pulled out a worn photograph. "This was taken 3 months before he died. That's him in the center, surrounded by every person he'd helped over 40 years. We had to rent a ballroom, ironically. The same one where last night's drama unfolded. 400 people came to honor a doorman who never earned more than $30,000 a year." Eleanor studied the photograph, seeing faces of every age and ethnicity, all looking at her father with unmistakable love. In the corner, barely visible, stood Robert Mitchell. Robert was there. He came late, stood in the back, left early. Samuel said, "But he came." And he cried through the entire thing. I think he knew what he'd lost by forgetting Marcus, and it was eating him alive. Last night wasn't random. Ms. Hayes. It was inevitable, the collision of guilt and grace. Eleanor pulled out her phone, checking the time. "The press conference is in 2 hours. Will you come?" "Wouldn't miss it. Marcus would want witnesses to the resurrection." At 8:30 a.m., the Mitchells arrived at the Ritz-Carlton through the service entrance, their choice deliberate and symbolic. Robert wore a simple suit he'd bought at Macy's that morning. Victoria had on a dress from Target. Brandon wore jeans and a plain white shirt, clothes that made him look his actual age rather than a premature power broker. Sarah Williams met them in the same basement where Eleanor had taken them hours before. She's upstairs in the ballroom, same spot where the wine was spilled. The press is already gathering. Someone leaked that there would be a major announcement. "Who leaked it?" Victoria asked. "Ms. Hayes herself. She wanted maximum witnesses to your transformation." And they took the service elevator up, emerging into a ballroom transformed, where last night's opulence had reigned. This morning brought simplicity. A single podium stood where the wine stain remained faintly visible. 50 journalists filled the front rows, their cameras ready for scandal or salvation. Eleanor stood at the podium, wearing a simple black dress that could have belonged to any working woman in the city. Grace stood beside her, still in hospital scrubs from her overnight shift. The contrast with last night's glamour was intentional and stark. "Thank you for coming on Christmas morning," Eleanor began. "I've asked you here to witness something unprecedented in New York's business community, the voluntary surrender of wealth in exchange for worth." She gestured to the Mitchells. "Last night, at the charity gala you all covered, Brandon Mitchell poured wine on my dress." His parents laughed. The crowd was shocked. What appeared to be casual cruelty was actually the desperate act of a young man trying to prevent greater cruelty while maintaining a performance that was killing him. Brandon stepped forward, his voice shaking but clear. "I've been performing my entire life, playing the role of the wealthy son, the cruel prince, the person who matters more than others. Last night, I humiliated Ms. Hayes because my friends wanted to destroy her completely. I chose the lesser evil instead of choosing good. That's who I've been, someone who chooses lesser evils instead of greater goods." He looked directly at the cameras. I'm 18 years old and I've never been real. Not once. Every word, every action, every relationship has been calculated for effect. I volunteer at the hospital anonymously because public kindness doesn't fit my brand. I give away millions secretly because admitting compassion would be admitting weakness. I'm exhausted from being someone I despise. Robert took the podium next. 30 years ago, I tried to kill myself on this hotel's balcony. A janitor's daughter talked me down, bought my foreclosed house, rented it back to me for $1. That woman was Eleanor Hayes. I built an empire on the foundation of her mercy, then forgot the foundation entirely. I taught my son that kindness was weakness, that visibility mattered more than virtue. His voice cracked. I've spent the last 5 years secretly destroying my company through hidden charitable giving, trying to buy back my soul without admitting I'd sold it. We're not facing bankruptcy from bad investments, we're facing it from good intentions badly executed. We've been hemorrhaging money to help people while performing cruelty to maintain power. Victoria's turn came. I was a model who married for love, then watched love turn into performance. We had everything and felt nothing. Our son grew up in a mansion that felt like a museum, beautiful, cold, and don't touch anything. We gave him everything except permission to be himself. She looked at the society reporters she'd courted for years. You've covered our parties, our purchases, our performances. Now cover our truth. We're surrendering everything. The houses, the cars, the company, all of it. We're accepting positions as employees in what was our own company, now owned by Hayes Foundation. We'll work for wages, not wealth. We'll earn respect, not demand it. Eleanor returned to the podium. Mitchell Enterprises' 5,000 employees will keep their jobs with raises and lifetime health care. The company will be restructured as a cooperative, with profits shared among those who create them. This isn't charity, it's justice. This isn't punishment, it's possibility. Tyler Brennan's father stood up in the audience, his face red with rage. This is insanity. You're destroying capitalism itself. No, Eleanor replied calmly. I'm demonstrating that capitalism without conscience is just elaborate theft. Your son, Mr. Brennan, charges $700 for insulin that costs $3 to make. That's not capitalism, that's cruelty with a business license. She pulled up a presentation on the large screen behind her. Hayes Foundation is creating a new model. Companies that join our network commit to profit sharing, living wages, and transparent operations. In return, they receive funding, support, and something more valuable, the knowledge that their success doesn't require others' suffering. A reporter from the Times raised her hand. Mrs. Hayes, this sounds idealistic but impractical. How can businesses compete while giving away profits? Grace answered this one. My mother's foundation is worth $50 billion, built on exactly these principles. My grandfather was a doorman who died with dignity intact. The Mitchells had everything and stood on a balcony contemplating suicide. Which model seems more practical for human flourishing? Another reporter, from the Wall Street Journal, stood. Mr. Mitchell, you're really going to work construction after running a $2 billion empire. Robert's answer surprised everyone. I started in construction. I was happy then, tired, but happy. Somewhere between the first million and the first billion, I stopped building things and started building facades. Yes, I'm going back to construction. My hands remember honest work, even if my heart forgot it. The questions continued for an hour. Some journalists were skeptical, others hostile. A few genuinely moved. Through it all, the Mitchells stood exposed, but somehow not diminished. There was dignity in admission, strength in surrender. Finally, a young reporter from a small Brooklyn paper asked the question that mattered. Brandon, what do you want people your age to understand from this? Brandon thought carefully. That performing success is exhausting. That Instagram isn't life. That having everything while feeling nothing isn't wealth, it's poverty with nice shoes. I want people my age to know that it's okay to be real, to be vulnerable, to care publicly and without irony. The performance is killing us, all of us. Eleanor concluded the conference with an announcement that sent ripples through the financial world. Any company that wants to join our model conscious capitalism, shared prosperity, dignity for all workers can apply for transformation funding. We have $10 billion ready to invest in companies willing to measure success by more than stock prices. As the journalists dispersed, many rushing to file their stories, the Mitchells stood with Eleanor and Grace in the emptying ballroom. The wine stain was still faintly visible, a ghost of last night's catalyst. "What now?" Brandon asked. "Now you go to the hospital," Grace said. "The children are waiting for Story Boy. Only this time, go as Brandon Mitchell, who chose to change, not as the sad prince under a curse." "And tomorrow?" Robert asked Eleanor. "Tomorrow is December 26th. You report to Mitchell Enterprises, Hayes Mitchell Cooperative, and begin your new positions. Robert in construction, Victoria in community relations, Brandon in the mailroom. You'll learn what you forgot, that work has dignity regardless of its nature." Victoria had one more question. "Your father, would he forgive us?" Eleanor smiled, the first genuinely warm smile they'd seen from her. "He forgave you 30 years ago, before you needed forgiving. He saw who you could become and held space for that possibility. The question isn't would he forgive you, it's can you forgive yourselves for taking so long to become who you were meant to be." At 2 p.m., Brandon walked into the pediatric ward of Children's Hospital. The wine incident was already viral news, but the children didn't care about scandal. They cared that Story Boy had come on Christmas. A little girl named Maria, whose mother worked 3 jobs to afford her heart medication, ran to him. "You came. The sad prince came for Christmas." "I'm not a prince," Brandon said, kneeling to her level. "And I'm not sad anymore. I'm just Brandon. And I brought a new story." "What's it about?" Maria asked. "It's about a boy who spilled wine and found water. About a family that lost everything and found themselves. About a doorman who held open hearts as well as doors. He gathered the children around. It's about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you." As he began the story, Grace watched from the doorway. Her mother stood beside her, having changed from the press conference outfit into comfortable clothes. "Papa would be proud," Grace said. Eleanor nodded, watching Brandon's face transform as he told the story. No performance, no calculation, just presence. "He always said the wealthy weren't evil, just lost. Today, 3 people found their way home." Outside, snow continued falling on New York City, covering the harsh edges with temporary softness. In a cemetery across town, a wine-stained dress lay on a doorman's grave, its purpose fulfilled. The stain had become a story. The story had become a transformation. And the transformation had become a possibility for others to follow. The Mitchell family fortune was gone, dissolved into wages and dignity. But in the pediatric ward, surrounded by children who saw him clearly, Brandon Mitchell discovered what his grandfather figure Marcus had always known: wealth isn't what you have, but what you give. And the only thing worth keeping is the ability to see and be seen as human. 5 years from this moment, Brandon would marry Grace Hayes in the hospital chapel, surrounded by the children they'd both served. Robert would walk his son down the aisle with hands calloused from honest construction work. Victoria would coordinate housing for 3,000 families in buildings her husband helped build. The wine stain in the ballroom would finally be removed during renovation, but the story would remain, told and retold as the night New York's elite learned that performance is prison and truth is freedom. But that was 5 years away. Today, Christmas 2024, Brandon Mitchell sat on a hospital floor, reading to children whose parents worked impossible hours for insufficient wages and felt wealthy for the first time in his life. The sad prince had abdicated his throne of performance and found a kingdom of connection. The wine had been spilled. The stain had been set. The story had begun. You know, I've told this story 100 times, and each time someone asks me what it really means. The truth is, I see myself in Brandon Mitchell not because I ever poured wine on anyone, but because I've performed my own versions of success while my soul starved for authenticity. We all wear masks, don't we? We laugh at the boss's bad jokes, pretend we're doing better than we are, post our best moments while hiding our worst fears. We teach our children to be successful instead of kind, then wonder why success feels so empty. Marcus Hayes understood something we've forgotten. Every person holding a door for you was once someone's beloved child, will be someone's ancestor, is someone's entire world. The doorman and the CEO both bleed when cut, both cry when grieved, both need mercy more than money. This Christmas, maybe we can spill our own wine, admit our failures, confess our exhaustion with performance, choose connection over position. Maybe we can teach our children that the janitor's dignity equals the general's, that wealth means nothing if you're poor in spirit, that the only inheritance worth leaving is the memory of how you treated those who could do nothing for you. That's all. That's everything.